Okay, hi everyone. Today I'm back and not with a movie or any TV, but with a book review. And I haven't done one for a while. And the reason I'm always juggling a few books at the same time. And I started to see that there was a bit of a link between a couple of the books that I was reading. And I thought, you know what, instead of just doing a couple of short ones, I'll just do one slightly bigger one, but linking the three books that I had just finished. And it's an odd mixture, I will say this. So, I'm always reading a couple of history books or poetry books or something which I can read out loud, which I really want to concentrate on. And the book that was taking that place was a study version of the Koran. And anyone who's been hearing my book reviews know that the book before that was a study version of the Bible. And I'm fascinated with storytelling. Even though I'm an atheist, I love studying religion and mythology and just all the ideas. So the Quran. But on my fun reading or fiction, I'd just read a couple of other books. And one was The City of Brass by S.A Chakraborty, who's a new female Muslim writer. And which is quite interesting, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then Ararat by Christopher Golden. And the reason Ararat got on my radar was it won the 2017 Bram Stoker Award for Best Horror Novel. So, what's the link between all these three things? Well, they're all very different in their own way, but they all talk about the Jinn, or in anglicized version, Genies. And so that was a little bit of a shock. So I'm going to start with the Quran because I'm not a religious scholar and I'm not going to really get into the Quran per se or anything to do with how this religion operates within the modern world. I'm just going to tell you, as a guy who reads a lot, who picked up the Quran, some of the things which I found shocking. And the number one thing was, having read the Bible, Old Testament, and then the New Testament, one of the things which shocked me was the Quran was, I'd say off the top of my head, it's 70-80%. It's just stories from the Old Testament, mainly, Solomon and others, but really a lot about Moses. And so that was a little bit of a shock because, when you look at all the troubles in the Middle East and everything. And then in the introduction of the study, it says how Muhammad, when he started becoming the prophet, thought that all the Jewish and Christians would flock to him because he was just saying, look, I'm just the latest in a line of prophets from Abraham to Moses to Jesus Christ, who's given very high praise in the Quran, which is also a little bit of a surprise, and that, I'm just the guy that's got the latest message. And the number one thing, which basically is, look, there's a reason why the Jews have been punished is because they've lost their way, and the Christians aren't going to get there either because although Jesus Christ was a prophet, he was not the Son of God, that there's been this big mistake and God has told me to come here and give you this message. So he was kind of shocked when that didn't work. And so the other 30% is quite interesting because there's all these things which are actually like where he gives a surah, which is meaning a verse within the Quran, saying that, all this gossip about my wife or the people who didn't help me in the fight for Medina or something, this is going to happen to them. And it's very like as if it just happened yesterday. And it's kind of weird because, is God really worried about that one little battle? I don't know. Anyway, the other interesting thing is Surah 72, you're reading and it's all, actually, as I said, it's all about when should you pray and Moses said this and all these kinds of things. And then all of a sudden you get to Surah 72 and Muhammad talks about how he went and met, saw, and gave the message of God to the Jinn. Now the Jinn, as I said, are genies. Now the definition kind of goes up and down depending on who you read and what type of the mythology you believe in, but generally they're kind of supernatural beings, and the definition has changed from pre-Islamic Arabian mythology to post-Islamic mythology, and now they've got a bit of a problem here because it's very hard for a modern reader to go, really? Like you're saying? Because he actually talks about like not just there was one genie, like that he converted them to Islam. It's very strange. And actually, he also talks about that the reason the first temple for Solomon, so for the Jews, was the genies went and helped him. And that's how it all got done. And Solomon was such a great kind of sorcerer that he ordered this genie to go to the Queen of Sheba and steal her throne. And it's all very odd. So the reason why I talked about that is, it was just an interesting read, and I actually think that if you're a modern person who's interested in current affairs, you kind of do need to, I'm not saying you got to read the Koran, but you really do need to know kind of like what the Islamic faith is, and same as you probably need to know the Christian and Jewish faith and other faiths, all of them, to kind of interpret the world. So that's that for this. The other thing is he often talks about how angels, that they're not the daughters of God, which I also found kind of really weird. It's just a really interesting kind of book. But I will say this, I found the story like you can read like the first 5 books of the Bible, you know, up to Exodus, a really interesting kind of story, all the stories, you know, Genesis and Moses and all that kind of thing. And then the New Testament, especially the Gospels, are just these fantastic stories, whether you believe them or not, whatever. The Quran's actually really dry, and I guess the people would say, well, that's because I'm reading it in English and not in Arabic. Okay, so that's for the Quran. So I'm going to be back in a second, and then I'll link it all together. Okay, so I'm back, and now I'm going to talk about my next book, which was City of Brass by S.A Chakraborty, who's this young female Muslim writer. And you can see, big, thick book. And it had got a lot of praise, and I can see why. Firstly, it's set in 18th century Cairo. The mythology is all Islamic / Egyptian, Arabic world, and it's just fascinating. And it's just a different way of looking at everything. So it's straight away, it's got a little bit of energy, which compared to something which is using the usual Western tropes. So that part is really good. It's a big book, and it spends a lot of time world building. And that is obviously really good because you believe this world. The problem is, though, it's basically a two-hander. The story begins with a character called Nari, and she obviously has some sort of, she's not quite human, but you're not quite sure what's happening. And she's, living by her wits in the slums of Cairo, but she seems to be able to do some things which aren't quite right. And eventually, in doing that, she makes connection with a demon / genie, and her destiny starts to unfold, and she's saved by Dara, who's this genie of this kind of now extinct tribe, give or take. And she's then opened to this whole world of like a parallel world of genies. And so the interesting thing about that is they do talk about how that they've been converted to Islam, which so I was reading both books, simultaneously, and both times that whenever I encountered this, it always kind of didn't seem right. But anyway, the other main character is Prince Ali, I think Al-Azad, and he is a leader of one of the tribes who has now taken control of really like the genie empire. So if you've got 500 pages and it's basically a two-hander, now that's not to say there aren't a million other subservient characters, But let's say compared to Game of Thrones, where you might have 12 main point of view characters and you go between it and you always finish one and go, oh God, I can't wait till I get back to Tyrion, for instance. This one, most of the time, you are just going from Ali to Nari and back. And that's a lot of exposition to be carried by just two people. And I found this was I will often now, as soon as I get to a certain stage in a book, I will stop reading if it's not working. And a couple times I nearly stopped this. But the world was so beautifully rendered that I just kept going. But it is a slog and there's a lot of exposition. And I always consider myself pretty good with that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's a part in the first act where all this chunk of how the whole genie kind of world works, and it's hard going. Now, the other interesting thing was, so I'm reading this book, and in it, Nari later on, it's not much of a spoiler, it's midway through, but she kind of seems to know kind of more her destiny, and she's called a Banu Nahida, which is like a healer. And so I'm reading the Koran, and you couldn't make this up. I get to Surah 59, and it's all about this legendary Jewish tribe who kind of disappeared or something, and they're called the Banu Nadir. See, you've got these genies, they're Islamically converted, you're using a lot of the same words, a lot of crossover. I found that really interesting. Now, the problem is that the book is not bad. And I actually think if you're really into that kind of culture and you want something new, you'll like it. But the most damning praise I guess I can give is I finished the book and I really enjoyed it. But I think it's first of a trilogy and I'm probably not going to go back to this world. So that's it for that. I'll be back with the third book in a second. Okay, so then the third book, Ararat, which I guess the name gives it away. Now, I've never read Christopher Golden, but he's got quite a rep in horror / kind of pulpy kind of world. And he's written quite a few books. This is quite well written. I've got some problems with it, but the overarching idea is really good. So you've got these two main protagonists. You've got tons of people because it's a horror book, and so you can imagine towards the end you kind of have a high body count. But the main two are Marion and Adam, and they're kind of like YouTube thrill seekers, and they're world kind of level climbers, and they go to these different places all over the world, and they hear that something has happened on Mount Ararat, and there's been this huge landslide, and something has been uncovered. Now, if you know anything about, you don't even have to be into the Bible or anything. I know as a kid I used to watch, all those mystery shows and, by Leonard Nimoy and everything. And there'd always be, every fifth show was the search for Noah's Ark, and it's always on Mount Ararat. So you can put it together pretty quickly. They found the Ark. Anyway, so the first act is getting there, and it's all snowy and horrible and blah, blah, blah. Then they get in there, and as I said, by the time that they're in the Ark, they've got, it's Adam and Marion, but it's also the Kurdish guides, and that's a whole subplot. And then you've got, representatives from the Turkish government, from the UN, and a couple other guys who you kind of go, well, how did they get there? And pretty soon work out, they're like US kind of intelligence or something like that. So, the part, once they're on the Ark and they start to do the archaeological dig and something a little bit off is found, is interesting. So it's very soon in the beginning of the first act, they get all these people together. There must be like 20 or 30 people by the end and about 10 named characters. And they find a kind of coffin sealed with this kind of bitumen and with engravings on it. And they open it, and inside is a corpse, which is also wrapped in kind of bitumen and stuff. And it has these horns, which resemble a demon. And so they're on the Ark, they found this demon. It seems to be, this is going to be mind-blowing for the whole world, all the world religions, and they all start getting quite a bad feeling on top of there's this storm coming. You can put all the pieces together. So the interesting thing for me, though, is the Kurdish people think it could be a demon or it could be a jinn. And it's got these horns. So because I was doing the research on the jinns for the Koran and for City of Brass, I look it up. And there's a very particular Islamic genie, and when you hear the name, you kind of will ring a bell. And it's called Shaitan, or Shaitan in English, which we have then changed to Satan. So this demon can it's basically incredibly compared to all the other jinn. Like there's about 7 or 8 type of jinn, depending on who you read, and some are quite good and are helpful or do nothing or whatever. And this guy's really bad and lays eggs in you. It's kind of like an alien thing, which doesn't really happen in this book. He's just more like a demon. But I was surprised because Shaitan has these huge horns, which really fits the description, even though it could be interpreted. Basically, that's the good thing. It could be interpreted by anyone. No matter what their fear is, this will be it. So the book, it rattles along for that whole second act. I think it's really, really good. You really get the claustrophobia of being trapped in this place, and you know that something's wrong and people start going missing, etc., etc. Now, the third act, I think, is incredibly clunky, and that's because you kind of really now know what's happening. You know the big bad, how it operates, what the rules are of this universe, and you kind of want it to wrap up, and it really drags that out, and I think that takes away a lot of energy. But I will say this, I'm now interested to read more of Christopher Golden's work, because even though I didn't think that worked, I could see that if he made me a different story, it's definitely not his writing style, which I really enjoyed. It's very taut, it's a nice thin book, you really run through it pretty quick. So that's Ararat. So that's my Genies in literature kind of thing. And now I'll just tell you what I'm going to be reading next and eventually reviewing. So, well, this will take me probably 3 years to read like it did the Bible. So this is my fact book, for want of a better thing. And it's Diarmaid MacCulloch, who's the Oxford Professor of Christianity, and his book, Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. So I ordered this halfway through my study Bible, even though I already had purchased the Koran, because I had so many questions, and although I know quite a lot, I'm just completely fascinated by how it all came about. So this is a beautiful book already. I've just read the introduction, and he's just knows everything. It's great, but that'll be eons before I talk about that again. So my fun book is Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. Now I've already read a good third of it, and I'm not sure. The idea is just absolutely a great conceit, and you might have worked out by the title, Meddling Kids, and just even looking at it. So it's like if you think about in the old days when I was a kid, there were lots of kids' books like Enid Blyton's The Fantastic Five and all these kind of things where kids go and do adventures and work out puzzles or mysteries. But really it's also like Scooby-Doo. They've got a dog, they got the kids, and they worked out this mystery a long time ago, but it's haunted them ever since. And as a person who loves H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, you really get the feeling that these kids solved a mystery or were given the solution to a mystery to avoid a greater one, and might be mythos related, and it's definitely a lot worse than what they thought. And something really bad happened the night they solved the other mystery, and their thoughts are starting to attack them as they try to put the pieces back together. So it'll be interesting to see how Lovecraftian it is by the end of the story. So that's it. They're the books. They're the next books coming up. And As usual, tons of books, movies, TV. I've got an idea for an Australian TV YouTube video coming up, so I'm working on that. If you like what I'm doing, you're always going to get lots of different stuff on this channel. Some of it you'll watch, some of it you'll just let go. If you do like it, subscribe, hit the bell, and then you'll always know when I've got new stuff. And I'm on Twitter at Guru Eden, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.